I don't care if your inbred family has been squatting here since the Stone Age. This is my lake now and you're trespassing on HOA property. That's what Vivian Blackthorne screamed at me while standing on my great-grandfather's hand-built dock. Her designer heels ground into wood older than her entire bloodline. The smell of her overpriced perfume clashed with the pine needles, like everything else about this woman clashed with decency. She gestured at the 32 identical rental cabins now covering my family's island like a suburban rash. Demolish that shack and pay 85 grand, or I'll bulldoze it myself. Sunlight flickered on the lake's surface, gold ripples reflecting in her sunglasses. Behind her, the cabins stood in perfect geometric rows, their tin roofs glinting like coins. They'd carved gravel paths through wild lilies, chopped down century-old cedars, and renamed the whole island Clearwater Shores. But to me, it was still Thornfield Isle, the heart of my bloodline. My great-grandfather Silas had built that dock with his bare hands in 1896, the same summer he married my great-grandmother. He once said, "If you treat land like a friend, it'll outlive you kindly. But if you treat it like a prize, it'll outlast you cruelly." I never forgot that. Vivian Blackthorne clearly never learned the difference. Her hair caught the sunlight like polished copper as she waved her manicured hand toward my cabin, my only home. Behind her, a group of HOA board members waited, dressed like soldiers of bureaucracy, clipboards, tablets, and smug smiles. "Ezra Thornfield," she said, reading my name like it was a bad word. "This property is no longer yours. The association has claimed eminent domain to preserve the aesthetic integrity of the lake. You can appeal if you want, but," she smiled, "we both know how that goes." I didn't say a word. I just stared at the water. It shimmered in the afternoon sun, the same sunlight that once danced on my grandfather's fishing boat, the same water where my mother taught me to swim. This was no HOA property. This was our history, written in ripples and roots. Vivian stepped closer, her heels thudding on the dock, echoing like distant thunder. "You're lucky, you know," she whispered. "Some people would kill to live here. But since you're so attached, I'll give you 72 hours to leave. After that." She tilted her sunglasses down, her blue eyes cold as steel. "I won't be responsible for what the excavators do." The men behind her chuckled. One spat into the lake. And just like that, they left. Her perfume lingered in the air long after her boat drifted away, carried by the same wind that once smelled of pine and trout and peace. That night, I sat on that dock, the planks creaking beneath me, moonlight cutting across the still water. The cabins stood silent in the distance, their porch lights glowing like a row of watchful eyes. They thought they'd stolen my land. But the thing about silence? It's never empty. It's where storms begin. The next morning, sunlight spilled across Lake Clearwater like liquid gold. Mist curled over the surface, dissolving into the warmth of dawn. I sat on the porch of my cabin, a chipped mug of coffee in my hand, watching the reflection of the cabins tremble in the ripples. Every one of those neat, rented cottages had a family laughing on their decks now, tourists grilling breakfast, children throwing breadcrumbs at the water. Vivian's empire was alive, chirping, clinking, echoing across land that wasn't hers. For a moment, I almost forgot how peaceful the sound of morning on this lake used to be. The soft flap of loons, the whistle of wind through cedar branches, the creak of dock ropes rubbing against old posts. Those were the sounds of my childhood, the rhythm of a time when the Thornfields still mattered. When my father died, he left me a box. An old iron chest, its hinges rusted shut. "When the time's right," he'd said. Back then, I thought he meant grief. Now I realized, maybe he meant war. I hadn't opened it in 10 years. But that morning, as I looked across at those cabins rising like an infection over our island, I fetched it from beneath the cabin floorboards. It groaned open like a memory-resisting daylight. Inside were papers, dozens of them, brittle and brown at the edges. Deeds. Handwritten maps. Letters from my great-grandfather Silas, the man who had bought this island when it was just untamed wilderness. The top letter was dated 1896, the ink faded but steady. To my descendants, should any man ever claim this land without rightful purchase, know that its borders are marked not by fences, but by faith. The lake shifts, the water rises, but the ground beneath remains ours. Always. I read that line 3 times before it hit me. The lake shifts. I pulled out the old survey map. The island's outline was drawn carefully, marked with tree lines, rock markers, and coordinates from an era before modern mapping. I laid it next to a current county map I'd downloaded from the courthouse site months earlier. And there it was, a subtle curve along the southern shoreline that didn't match. Over a century, water levels had risen slightly. The HOA's development maps, the ones Vivian had used to build her lakefront paradise, had been drawn from incomplete modern data. Half of those cabins, maybe more, stood on what was technically still Thornfield property. My chest tightened. The air seemed to hum around me. I walked down to the dock. The same dock Vivian had desecrated with her heels. The morning sun warmed the wood beneath my palms as I knelt and looked down at the water. Beneath the reflection of the sky, I could see the faint outline of submerged fence posts, wooden stakes my great-grandfather had once hammered into the lake bed to mark his boundary. They were still there. Half buried, but visible in the sunlight. For the first time in years, I smiled. I called the county clerk's office that same afternoon. Asked for old property registries. The woman on the line sighed when she heard my name. Oh, the Thornfield claim. I thought that was all settled ages ago. It will be, I said. Soon. She didn't know it, but that call lit the first spark of a storm that had been waiting 129 years. As the sun dipped low that evening, I watched its reflection dance over the lake once more. The cabins glowed in the amber light, unaware that their time was already ticking away. Vivian Blackthorne thought she'd taken everything from me. But my family had left me a weapon sharper than anger. Proof. And proof, in the right hands, was more powerful than any bulldozer. 3 summers passed. Every morning, sunlight spilled across Lake Clearwater like nothing had changed, as if time itself refused to take sides. The cabins stood bright and cheerful, their white fences cutting through green grass, their decks crowded with strangers who didn't even know whose ground they stood on. And I let them. I watched them barbecue, fish, laugh. Watched their kids splash where my great-grandfather once set his trout nets. Watched Vivian Blackthorne's empire bloom like algae on still water, fast, bright, and toxic. But beneath that calm surface, I was working. I spent those years digging, not just through memories, but through records. Property deeds, surveyor notes, water level studies, old municipal filings. Every document was another puzzle piece sliding into place. The county registrar knew me by name now. So did the clerk. So did the assistant attorney. No one asked why I came so often. Maybe because I always came with a smile, polite, quiet, harmless. They didn't see the storm brewing behind my calm. That first winter, I rebuilt my grandfather's dock in secret. Not for boats, but to mark the true boundary. Each post I replaced was a declaration. Every nail I drove into the wood felt like reclaiming a heartbeat lost to time. When spring thawed the ice, I started flying a small drone, at first for scenery shots, as I told the tourists who passed by. But the footage was far from innocent. Each flight recorded GPS data, elevation points, and visual proof of the cabin sitting directly on Thornfield soil. One of those cabins, the biggest, with blue shutters and a manicured lawn, was Vivian's own lakefront mansion. The irony wasn't lost on me. She had built her throne on my father's land. In those quiet years, Vivian barely noticed me. She had grown too comfortable, the kind of arrogance that only comes from unchecked power. She'd turned the HOA into her personal court, issuing fines, enforcing dress codes, even controlling what color people could paint their mailboxes. People feared her. But fear fades when one man decides not to bow anymore. So I waited. I let the lake do what it does best, reflect. And in that reflection, I learned patience. One morning, I drove into town and found myself standing in front of the courthouse. The building looked the same as it had when my father brought me here as a boy: red brick, wide steps, flags swaying in the sunlight. Inside, I handed a thick envelope to the clerk. "Petition to verify historical land boundaries," I said simply. The clerk glanced at the name on the papers: Thornfield. She looked at me like she'd seen a ghost. Maybe she had. Because for decades, this island had belonged to my family in silence. And now, silence was speaking again. That summer, rumors started spreading through the HOA community. Someone had requested old geological surveys. Someone had hired a private auditor. Someone was asking uncomfortable questions about building permits. Vivian laughed them off, of course. Just another local crank, she told her board. The kind who thinks owning a canoe makes him a historian. She didn't see the signs, or maybe she didn't want to. By the time she realized, it was too late. Late one evening, as the sun dipped low and turned the lake into molten copper, I stood at the end of the dock again. The wind smelled like cedar and rain. My reflection stared back at me, older now, sharper. 3 years of silence had done their work. Every lie she built was about to collapse, not with noise, but with truth. Because truth doesn't shout. It waits. And when it finally speaks, it shakes the ground. The morning of the hearing was unreasonably bright. Sunlight poured through the courthouse windows, gilding the dust in the air like flecks of judgment. I stood at the edge of the courtroom, my worn leather satchel clutched in one hand, the weight of a century resting inside it. Vivian Blackthorn arrived 10 minutes late, as if time itself should wait for her. Her heels struck the marble like hammers, echoing across the room. She smiled at the reporters, her lipstick the color of victory. "Mr. Thornfield," she said, nodding at me, "still playing property hero?" I didn't answer. Some battles don't need noise. The judge entered. A man with silver hair, tired eyes, and a voice that carried like distant thunder. Case number 47C, Thornfield vs. Clearwater Homeowners Association. The clerk called my name first. I rose slowly, setting the satchel on the table. My fingers brushed the old iron lock my father once touched. Inside were deeds signed in fountain ink, maps drawn by men who measured land by stars and faith. Vivian's attorney launched first, smooth, confident, polished. He spoke of community development, progress, and irrelevant ancestral claims. His voice was honey laced with poison. Then it was my turn. I took out the oldest map, the one my great-grandfather had drawn in 1896, and unfolded it carefully on the table. The parchment trembled under the fluorescent lights, edges browned by time. "This," I said quietly, "is Lake Clearwater before the reservoir expansion of 1911. The courtroom murmured. I set a second map beside it, the county's current survey, printed in blue ink, clean and modern. Then, I placed the two on top of each other. When the outlines aligned, you could see it, clear as sunlight through glass. A third of Vivian's lakefront development sat inside Thornfield property lines. Every cabin. Every deck. Even her mansion. Her lawyer stammered something about outdated data. I didn't look at him. I kept my eyes on her. Vivian's smile faltered. Her fingers tightened around her pen. I pulled out a final document, notarized photographs, drone imagery, GPS coordinates, and the county surveyor's signed verification. Property boundaries were miscalculated after the 1911 water rise, I said evenly. The association never corrected the deed line. Every cabin they built, every dollar they earned, was built on stolen soil. The courtroom was silent. You could hear the clock tick. Then came the sound of a pen snapping in Vivian's hand. The judge leaned forward, his glasses slipping down his nose. "Mrs. Blackthorne," he said, voice calm but edged like a blade, "is it true that your HOA failed to verify original deed records before construction?" Her attorney tried to speak, but she raised her hand, stopping him. "Yes," she said finally. "But it was a clerical." The judge held up a hand. "Clerical or not, ownership law is not flexible." He turned to me. "Mr. Thornfield, the court recognizes your rightful claim to the disputed land and all structures thereon." For a moment, no one moved. The sunlight shifted across the floor, inch by inch, until it touched my boots. Vivian sat down slowly, her face drained of color. The same woman who once threatened to bulldoze my family's dock now couldn't lift her eyes. When the gavel struck, it sounded like thunder rolling over water. I gathered my papers in silence. As I walked out of the courtroom, reporters swarmed, microphones flashing, voices rising. I didn't stop. Outside, the air smelled of pine and sunlight, the scent of home returning. For 3 years I'd waited for this moment. For 3 generations, my family had earned it. And somewhere, in the quiet echo of that victory, I swear I heard my grandfather's voice, soft as ripples, whisper. "If you treat land like a friend, it'll outlive you kindly." The day I stepped back onto Clearwater Island, the lake was glass. Not a ripple. Not a whisper. Only the slow, golden hum of sunlight spilling through the trees, the same way it must have looked when my great-grandfather first arrived here in 1896. I came alone. No reporters. No lawyers. Just me and the weight of 129 years of family breath buried beneath these roots. The cabins stood silent now, 32 perfect boxes of arrogance and greed. Empty, lifeless, their identical roofs glinting like scars across the waterline. But the land. The land felt alive again. Each step I took creaked with history, the boards of the old dock sighing under my boots, the scent of pine needles warming in the sun. That same dock where Vivian had once stood, calling me a trespasser. Now it was mine again. Legally. Spiritually. Eternally. I started with the cabins nearest the shore. I didn't demolish them, though I could have. No, I opened the windows and let the air in. The scent of pine and lakewater chased out the rot of perfume and neglect. I turned the cabins into something different, something worthy of the soil they sat on. Each one became a haven for the people who'd once been priced out, pushed aside, or ignored by the HOA's exclusive community. Fishermen. Park rangers. Local artists. The kind of souls who understood what it meant to belong with the land, not on top of it. They paid nothing. Just helped care for the island. We rebuilt trails, restored the shoreline, planted native pines where driveways once cut through earth. Slowly, Clearwater Island began to breathe again. One evening, as I stood by the dock, I saw a reflection in the water, not mine, but my father's, smiling faintly. He used to bring me here every summer, teaching me how to mend nets, how to listen for storms in the silence. He'd say, "The lake doesn't talk to everyone, Ezra. But when it does, you listen." That night, it spoke. Soft ripples brushed against the pilings, whispering something like "thank you." I looked toward the far side of the island, toward Vivian's former mansion. The court had handed me the deed, but I couldn't bear to live there. It was too loud, too hollow, too drenched in greed. So I turned it into a community lodge, a place for local children to learn about the lake's ecology, for artists to paint, for old families to tell their stories again. I renamed it Silas House, after my great-grandfather. The plaque by the door read, "This land isn't owned. It's remembered." A month later, I received a letter, hand-delivered, unmarked. Inside was a single sentence written in elegant cursive. "You win this round, Thornfield. But I'll be back. Vivian." I smiled. Maybe she would. But she'd have to face a lake that no longer bowed to anyone. That summer, the island became what it was always meant to be, a mirror of the people who respected it. Fishermen's laughter replaced the echo of hammers. The smell of pine sap replaced diesel fumes. And when the sunset fell over the water, the reflection didn't show cabins or fences, only the glow of homecoming. I sat on the dock one last time, toes grazing the water. The wind carried voices, my father's, my grandfather's, even Silas's, soft and proud. 3 generations, all whispering the same truth I'd waited years to earn. You can't steal what's rooted in blood. The sunlight sank behind the trees. And as the water turned gold one last time, I whispered back. Welcome home.